A quiet night over the Tokmach line. A fuel train thunders south. 13 cars of aviation fuel in the front, diesel stacked in the middle. Unseen, a swarm of drones arcs overhead. The operators have one chance: dive into the exact wagon that will set off an unstoppable chain of fire. 7 seconds later, flames leap skyward, the chain splits, and in under 7 minutes, the only operational rail artery into Crimea is choking on black smoke. This wasn't just an attack. It was a story of precision, timing, and total disruption. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How do you strike a moving train under enemy jamming with seconds to spare? That was the challenge facing Ukrainian operators as they studied one of the most important arteries in the war, the single rail line tying occupied Crimea to Russian positions along the southern front. Every day, freight trains pushed tons of ammunition, fuel, and supplies down those tracks. Each movement reinforced Russian artillery fire across Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, and the coastal corridor. Cutting that artery would mean more than slowing trains. It would choke a supply line, starve forward operating positions, and force Russia to move by truck, a slower and far more vulnerable system. But hitting that line was nearly impossible. Russian command knew these tracks were a lifeline, and they defended them as such. Drones patrolled day and night. Ground sensors tracked movement. Jammers emitted radio noise across wide bands, designed to blind incoming signals. Any incoming strike risked being blinded, diverted, or cut down before it could reach the target. And even if a weapon survived the interference, predicting the exact position of a locomotive moving at close to 100 kilometers per hour, hauling 36 cars was a nightmare. The window for a strike was measured in single seconds, less time than it takes to draw a breath. So Ukraine didn't rely on a single stream of intelligence. They built a picture out of fragments. From orbit, satellite images revealed temporary track beds and loading positions. From the ground, electromagnetic reflections gave away wagons disguised with painted nets, meant to pass as flat cars, intercepted GSM traffic between dispatch posts, exposed crew shift rotations, hinting when trains would leave depots. Even locomotive telemetry, bouncing back and forth across cellular towers, was intercepted and decoded. All of it fed into a digital profile of the train that was larger than the train itself. Operators began to stitch this puzzle together until patterns emerged. Every refueling interval had a rough timetable. Departures clustered around shifts, delayed when operators changed. Some trains deliberately ran heavy toward dawn, aiming to mix with civilian traffic. But buried in those movements were reliable points, places where speed was greatest, where curves locked trajectories, where trains had no choice but to run on schedule. Timing an attack meant predicting not just where a locomotive was, but where it would be in 5, 6, 7 seconds. It was the equivalent of throwing a dart from miles away at the 14th car of a roller coaster rushing past, while someone shines a spotlight in your eyes and scrambles the sound in your ears. Weeks of preparation narrowed down the perfect moment. Scouts noted that electromagnetic shadows appeared differently when fuel was carried in cylindrical tanks rather than disguised boxcars. Operators listening in on open conversations from conductors caught subtle mentions of loading priority, words that betrayed fuel transfers. Each cue was layered into the tactical picture until the team knew not just which train to strike, but which wagon mattered most. It wasn't enough to hit steel. They needed fire, and that required finding the volatile core. By the time the ambush was set, tracking data could place the train within meters, even under enemy interference. Drone operators had the speed, the distance, the angle, all calculated down to fractions. The surveillance net was tight enough to identify the precise carriage most likely to ignite when pierced. They had turned incomplete scraps of data into near-surgical precision, and when the moment came, all they needed was a craft small enough to survive the jamming and fast enough to find its target. But gathering intelligence was only the first move. The harder task was keeping those drones alive, long enough to strike. What happens when 7 drones, each carrying only 5 kilograms, meet more than 150 tons of explosive fuel? That question moved from theory to reality when Ukraine launched its Maluk V2 fleet against the Crimean rail. The weapon itself wasn't a massive cruise missile or a heavy bomb. It was a lightweight craft shaped for speed, with a fiberglass frame resistant to heat and encrypted controls to shield its operators from Russian interference. Its size was an advantage. Cheap, fast, and easy to produce in numbers, the Maluk V2 had one task in this mission: pierce the exact wagon that would turn a hidden train into a running Firestorm. Getting there was anything but simple. Russian defenses around the tracks created a near wall of electronic interference. Signals scattered across multiple frequencies, forcing drones to fight to stay connected. Camouflage nets stretched across wagons, broke their outlines from above, and painted surfaces gleamed in ways meant to confuse targeting cameras. Even with GPS, the dense jamming environment meant the drones had to rely on redundant onboard navigation and encrypted line-of-sight communication. For operators, guiding the V2s became a battle against distortion, constantly correcting, as if steering through a storm of invisible waves. The formation that flew into the rail corridor wasn't random. Operators split the drones into 3 segments, each with a job to perform. The first wave carried the opening strike, designed to trigger fuel ignition. Behind them came reinforcements, ready to widen the damage if the initial hit only partly succeeded. The third set played a more subtle role, sabotaging signals and distracting Russian interference units, so the lead drones could finish their run. 7 small aircraft, each no larger than a motorcycle on radar, crossed into enemy airspace on preloaded routes, their operators watching through sharpened video feeds. At 00:43 local time, the first drone dropped from altitude and locked onto its target. Its programmed path intersected the 14th wagon of the convoy, a tanker carrying diesel. The strike ruptured the side and sprayed vapor into the night. Within 2 seconds, the mixture of air and fuel found ignition, and the rail line lit up orange. Flames expanded across multiple cars as pressure blasted metal hatches skyward like shells. The second wave arrived while the fireball was still climbing. These drones plunged into adjacent wagons, one striking between couplings and snapping steel connectors. As explosions rippled, the wagons in the rear broke apart from the forward section, derailing themselves in the violent separation. Steel wheels tore into wooden sleepers, twisting rails into tangled shards. The destruction was uncontrollable. Railroad ballast melted beneath the tankers, and over 400 meters of track buckled into useless arcs. Fires burned for 3 hours, forcing emergency teams to watch from distance until the fuel itself burned out. For Russia, the outcome was devastating. Their only direct supply line into Crimea was knocked out for nearly a week, creating bottleneck that stretched from the front lines back into depots. The cost? About $266,000 for Ukraine's operators, less than the price of a single artillery shelling mission. The impact: millions in destroyed stock, frontline delays, and an artery that would need days of repair. From ashes on the tracks to silence on the radios, the strike carried more than physical destruction. It was a broadcast about the future of war, where railways, fuel, and information itself had become targets no less than tanks. This strike revealed something larger than the destruction of a single train. It showed how drones can flip an entire battlefield by forcing the enemy's own fuel to become the weapon. A single swarm cut a supply chain, burned through an artery, and froze movement across miles of front. In today's war, the math speaks for itself. A drone worth $38,000 can take out a cargo valued at more than $2 million. With the shockwaves measured in days of lost operations. If railways are battlegrounds now, what other hidden arteries might soon be targeted?